In the quiet towns of Pennsylvania, hidden beneath the glitter and lights of a traveling show, a darkness thrived unnoticed for years. Behind the laughter and applause, 17 souls were chained, confined in shadows where the world above could not reach them. Their cries were silent, their suffering hidden behind illusions and spectacle. Tonight, we take you inside that horrifying world, uncovering the mystery of the freak show where human endurance was tested beyond imagination. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear is not just a story. It's a journey through fear, survival, and the unbroken human spirit. From the first eerie whispers to the shocking discovery that shook an entire town, this is a story that will grip your heart, haunt your thoughts, and make you question everything you think you know about spectacle and reality. This is the chilling tale of 1891, Pennsylvania, the freak show where 17 performers were discovered chained in the basement. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine stepping into the dark heart of a building in Pennsylvania in 1891, a place that promised wonder, excitement, and entertainment. But behind the flickering gaslights, behind the dazzling signs, there lay a secret far more horrifying than any stage illusion. 17 performers, men, women, and even children, were discovered chained in the basement, hidden from the public eye. Their lives, once filled with hope and ambition, had been reduced to mere spectacle, their humanity obscured by chains and shadows. These were individuals whose bodies and minds had been exploited for the thrill of others, trapped in a world where curiosity overshadowed compassion. Their story is not just one of cruelty, but a chilling reminder of how easily society can turn a blind eye when amusement is offered in exchange for suffering. These performers, whose talent and uniqueness could have inspired admiration, instead became prisoners of fear and neglect. As we recount this dark chapter of history, we must remember the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the depths of despair, these individuals survived. Their existence challenges us to confront injustice wherever it hides and to honor the dignity of all lives, no matter how different they may seem. The chains may have bound their bodies, but they could not bind their spirit. Their story endures as a warning, a testimony, and a call to humanity. That curiosity and entertainment must never come at the cost of human life and freedom. Let us remember the 17 souls of that Pennsylvania basement, not as curiosities, not as spectacles, but as people whose courage in the shadows demands our reflection and our respect. The town had never seen anything like it, and yet there it was, rolling into the streets with all the pomp and pride of a traveling show. The wooden wheels of the carriage groaned under the weight of crates and canvas tents, the colors faded from sun and travel, but still striking enough to draw a crowd. People pressed their faces against windows, children tugged at their mothers' skirts, and even the most cautious adults couldn't help but slow their steps to watch. The banners flapped in the wind, announcing marvels and wonders that promised to dazzle, amuse, and bewilder. A smell of horses, sawdust, and something more foreign lingered in the air, giving the whole scene a strange, almost electric excitement. Behind the performers' smiles and the elaborate masks, behind the painted signs boasting of impossibilities, there was something in the eyes of those who handled the show that unsettled anyone who lingered too long. No one could quite put their finger on it, but there was a subtle tension, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for some unseen revelation. The townsfolk murmured among themselves, their voices a mix of curiosity and unease, daring each other to venture closer, to peek behind the velvet curtains, to glimpse what lay beneath the surface of the grand spectacle. The performers arrived at dusk, the lanterns casting long, flickering shadows across the cobblestone streets. Children ran ahead, imagining creatures and magicians beyond their wildest dreams, while adults tried to measure their excitement against a gnawing suspicion that something was off. The tall tents rose like ominous sentinels, their canvas walls patched and faded but still impressive, promising wonders that would only be revealed once the sun had disappeared completely behind the horizon. Inside, the air was thick with sawdust, perfume, and the faint tang of something metallic, a smell that went unnoticed at first, but lingered at the edges of awareness. Whispers of strange sounds, muffled voices, clanking chains, the low hum of instruments tuned in ways unfamiliar, took root in the minds of those who ventured near. No one could see past the outer curtain without paying the price in their curiosity. And yet, curiosity is a flame that refuses to die out, burning brighter as the night deepened and the shadows lengthened. The performers themselves were a spectacle, walking among the town in costume and disguise, their eyes darting constantly as if guarding a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. Some wore glittering fabrics that shimmered under the lantern light, while others moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, limbs bending and twisting in ways that defied expectation. The townspeople stared, their fascination tinged with unease, as the performers offered brief, polite bows, smiles that did not quite reach their eyes, and small gestures of acknowledgement. There was a rhythm to their movements, a silent communication among themselves that no outsider could decipher, a choreography that suggested unity and secrecy at the same time. As night fell and the first show was announced, a sense of anticipation rippled through the crowd. The tickets were sold quickly, some handed over with trembling hands, others with a forced casualness that hid an inner tension. The lanterns illuminated faces eager for entertainment, unaware that the real story lay not on the stage, but behind the walls that concealed a darker truth. The show began with music, low at first, then swelling with the entrance of performers who dazzled with skill and mystery, acrobats twisting in impossible shapes, singers whose voices carried like liquid fire through the air, magicians who produced illusions that left jaws dropped and heart racing. And yet, despite the spectacle, a subtle unease lingered in the back of the minds of those who watched. A whisper of doubt that grew louder with each performance, hinting that not all was as it seemed. The thrill of wonder could not mask the faint shadow that clung to every movement, every gesture, and every fleeting glance exchanged behind the curtain. By the second evening, stories had begun to circulate among the townsfolk, small rumors about strange noises heard after the crowd had dispersed, about figures glimpsed moving in the shadows behind the tents, about chains rattling where no chains should exist. The whispers grew, carried on the wind from house to house, spreading fear and fascination in equal measure. Those who had seen the performers up close reported that something about their eyes was unnerving, a depth of despair or knowledge that suggested they had endured more than the audience could imagine. Some said it was merely imagination, fueled by the eerie atmosphere of the night and the imagination of an overactive mind, yet the consistency of the reports lent them a weight impossible to ignore. The performers themselves remained calm, almost impervious to the rumors, continuing their acts with precision and poise, masking whatever secrets they harbored beneath layers of makeup and costume. Each night, the show drew larger crowds, curiosity overpowering fear, and the tension in the air grew thicker, almost tangible, as if the very walls of the tents had absorbed the hidden sorrow of those who labored unseen. It was in the quiet hours, long after the music had ceased and the lanterns had been extinguished, that the true horror lay hidden, beneath the floorboards of the largest tent, behind a concealed door that even the most curious townsfolk would have missed, was a basement that defied imagination. The air was stale and suffocating, thick with the scent of damp wood, rust, and something far more sinister. 17 individuals were confined there, their bodies bound with heavy chains, their spirits worn thin by the months, or perhaps years, of confinement. They were performers of extraordinary skill, yet here in the darkness, skill meant nothing. Each face told a story of suffering, of dreams deferred and humanity denied, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief at the continued cruelty that surrounded them. The chains cut into their skin, leaving marks that would not soon fade, physical scars that mirrored the deeper, invisible wounds of the soul. Even in this despair, there was resilience. Some whispered to one another, sharing fragments of memory, fragments of hope, or fragments of plans for escape that might never come to fruition. Each voice was a testament to survival, a quiet rebellion against the inhumanity imposed upon them. The performers had once been the pride of their own communities, traveling and enchanting audiences with feats that seemed impossible. Yet they had been lured into a situation from which there was no return. Promises of fame, fortune, and respect had been nothing more than a ruse, a trap disguised as opportunity. Behind the grand performances, behind the glittering costumes and the applause, lay a cruel reality hidden from the eyes of those who paid to be entertained. Time lost meaning in that basement. Days bled into nights with little distinction, and the performers were left to the rhythms of their captors, existing solely to satisfy demands that were both arbitrary and relentless. The clanging of chains was a constant reminder of their predicament, the sound echoing off the damp walls like a cruel metronome keeping time to their suffering. Despite the oppression, glimmers of humanity persisted. Quiet songs hummed in the darkness, whispered stories of better times were shared, small acts of kindness offered to remind one another that they were not completely broken. Outside, the town continued to revel in the spectacle above ground, oblivious to the shadows below. Laughter, music, and the scent of roasted treats filled the air, a stark contrast to the suffering that festered beneath the boards. No one could hear the muffled cries or see the despairing eyes that pressed against the walls, yet the energy above seemed almost tainted, a subtle undercurrent of unease that no one could explain. Those who dared to linger near the edges of the tents sensed it, a disturbance in the night air, but could not identify its source. The basement, hidden from the public and from the law, became a prison and a tomb, a place where time was measured in hunger, pain, and fleeting hope. The performers clung to one another as best they could, forming fragile bonds that were both emotional lifelines and practical necessities. Every whispered plan, every shared memory, every moment of courage became a small act of defiance against the suffocating control of their captors. The discovery of this basement, though months away, would later shock the town and the world. But in 1891, in that Pennsylvania street, no one knew. The show above continued, dazzling audiences, masking horrors beneath the wooden floors, a duality that was impossible to reconcile. For the performers below, survival was the only priority, and for the audience above, oblivion was bliss. The two realities existed side by side, connected yet separated, a stark reminder of the fragility of perception and the ease with which darkness can hide behind spectacle. The performers dreamed of freedom, imagined sunlight on their faces, and whispered each other's names as a tether to sanity. They waited, hoping, enduring, and silently resisting the cruelty that had ensnared them. The contrast between the world above and the prison below was almost too much to bear, yet it forged a resilience that would not be extinguished. By the time the rumors reached a critical mass, the town had been under the spell of the show for weeks. Each evening, a ritual of fascination and unease. Lanterns flickered along cobblestone streets as families, couples, and solitary wanderers converged on the central square, drawn by curiosity and the promise of marvels. Word of the strange noises, the glimpsed shadows, and the subtle unease that clung to the performers had begun to circulate, whispered in hushed tones over dinner tables and in the aisles of the market. Children tugged impatiently at the hands of their guardians, eager for stories that might explain the mystery, while adults attempted to suppress the rising tension with casual laughter and jokes about overactive imaginations. Yet the tension persisted, an almost imperceptible hum that grew with each passing night. Those who lingered near the fringes of the tents noticed it first. A slight shift in the air, the faintest sound of something moving where nothing should move, and eyes that seemed to watch without blinking. The performers themselves were careful to maintain their facade of grandeur, their smiles and gestures precise, but the most perceptive could detect a fatigue beneath the veneer, a hidden fear that betrayed the shadow beneath the light. The townsfolk were enthralled, a mixture of awe and dread pushing them forward into the spectacle, while simultaneously warning them to keep their distance. As the show progressed, the performers' acts became more intricate and daring. Acrobats twisted in impossible shapes above the crowd, balancing on wires so thin they seemed invisible, and singers filled the night air with melodies so haunting that listeners swore they carried an almost supernatural resonance. Magicians executed feats that appeared to defy the natural laws, drawing gasps and applause from the audience, while other performers engaged in grotesque displays of contortion and illusion that left onlookers questioning the limits of human capability. Behind the curtain, however, the energy was different, tense, and urgent, a silent communication flowing between those who had endured the unseen horrors of captivity. Their movements were precise, choreographed not merely for performance but for survival, a delicate dance between impressing the crowd and preserving themselves from the scrutiny of those who might uncover their secret. The contrast between the show above and the suffering below was stark, a duality that deepened with every passing day, and yet the performers adapted, finding ways to endure even as their captors remained vigilant, always observing, always controlling. The whispers in the town grew more persistent, fueled by brief glimpses of unusual behavior. Some claimed to have seen figures moving behind the tents at odd hours, silhouettes that did not match any known performer, while others described muffled cries that seemed to come from below the ground. Those who dared to investigate were met with carefully orchestrated distractions or subtle intimidation, enough to make them retreat and question their own senses. Yet the rumors spread, branching outward like cracks in a fragile wall, creating an undercurrent of suspicion that could not be ignored. Some residents began to avoid the area after dark, fearful of what might lie hidden in the shadows, while others, driven by curiosity and the need to know the truth, lingered, straining to catch a glimpse of the hidden reality that they sensed but could not confirm. The performers themselves remained focused on the routines, drawing energy from the audience while keeping their own fears in check, masking the anguish beneath layers of makeup and costume. Beneath the floorboards, the 17 captives clung to one another in the darkness. Their world was one of shadows and chains, where each day brought the challenge of survival and the quiet struggle to retain identity and memory. Some of them had been performers for years, traveling from town to town, honing their craft and dazzling audiences, while others had been drawn in by promises that were never kept, finding themselves ensnared in a nightmare from which escape seemed impossible. The chains that bound them were heavy and unyielding, their hands and feet marked by the unforgiving iron, yet their spirits remained defiant in small ways. Whispers and quiet songs echoed through the confined space, acts of resistance that reminded them and each other that they were not completely broken. Each story shared, each memory recalled, was a lifeline, tethering them to a sense of self that captivity sought to erase. The basement itself seemed to absorb their suffering, a silent witness to cruelty and endurance alike, its walls imbued with the echoes of chains, despair, and fleeting hope. Above ground, the show continued to mesmerize and distract. The townspeople, caught between fascination and fear, often overlooked the subtle signs that something was wrong. The performers' smiles were convincing, their gestures flawless, and the spectacle overwhelming, creating a shield behind which the basement's horrors remained hidden. Occasionally, glimpses of the performers' fatigue or moments of unguarded fear slipped through, noted by the most observant, but these were dismissed as part of the theatrics, the artistry of a show designed to push boundaries and provoke emotion. Yet beneath the surface, the truth persisted, a constant pressure waiting for discovery, a hidden reality that could no longer be contained indefinitely. The tension reached its apex when one evening, a curious young man emboldened by rumors and fueled by fascination, ventured closer to the back of the main tent. His steps were careful, deliberate, as he navigated the shadows, the lantern light flickering against his path. A strange creak beneath his foot, almost imperceptible, hinted at the hollow space beneath the floorboards, and the air seemed to thicken around him, pressing against his chest, as though aware of his intrusion. He paused, straining to listen, and the faintest sound of muffled voices reached him, a whisper of suffering that sent a shiver down his spine. Retreating silently, he realized the depth of the horror hidden beneath the spectacle, a realization that weighed heavily on his mind and seeded the growing fear that the show's grandeur masked something far darker. The following days were marked by a strange duality, as the town oscillated between the thrill of the show and the creeping unease that had begun to take root. Mothers clutched their children more tightly in the streets. Merchants whispered among themselves, and the most daring continued to linger near the tents, trying to piece together the fragments of suspicion into something concrete. The performers above ground remained oblivious, or at least convincingly unaware of the growing scrutiny, their acts more precise and practiced than ever, masking the tension below with a dazzling display of skill and showmanship. The basement, however, told a different story. The 17 captives endured each day in silence, counting the hours and minutes, speaking only in whispers that traveled like fragile lifelines across the darkness. Each chain clinked with a rhythm that became their pulse, a reminder of the unyielding control that bound them and the tenuous hope that remained. Small gestures, shared glances, and whispered names formed a secret language of resistance, a network of communication that sustained their will to survive. The captives' ingenuity grew with necessity. Some fashioned crude tools from scraps of wood and metal, hidden in pockets of darkness, attempting to test the strength of their restraints and the structure of the basement itself. Others devised codes, small systems of signaling that allowed information to travel from one end of the basement to another, conveying both practical advice and emotional support. They shared memories of performances past, of applause and admiration, stories of freedom and adventure that reminded them of the lives they had lived before confinement. Even in chains, they found ways to assert their humanity, to cling to identities that captivity sought to erase, to maintain the essence of self against overwhelming odds. Above, the show's success continued, a strange contradiction of joy and horror. The townspeople cheered, unaware of the hidden suffering, their fascination blinding them to the subtle clues that hovered at the edges of perception. Every gasp, every clap, every cheer was a stark contrast to the despair that echoed in the basement, a constant reminder that spectacle can obscure reality and that appearances are often deceiving. The performers above maintained their poise, their energy, their mastery of illusion, while the captives below endured a different kind of performance, one of patience, resilience, and the quiet assertion of spirit. Each day was a delicate balance between survival and hope, between despair and resistance, a relentless test of endurance in a place designed to strip them of both. In the shadows, some captives began to plan, to imagine a world beyond the chains, to consider strategies that might one day lead to freedom. They studied the movements of those above, memorized patterns of steps and sounds, and tested weaknesses in the confinement. Every success, however small, became a spark of hope, a flame that refused to be extinguished by darkness or fear. Even in isolation and suffering, the human spirit proved remarkably tenacious, finding ways to assert itself, to communicate, and to resist. The basement became a crucible, forging bonds of trust, courage, and ingenuity among those who shared its darkness. Outside, the town remained caught in the duality of spectacle and suspicion, the thrill of entertainment mingling with a faint, persistent unease. The performers above continued their acts flawlessly, oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the growing questions and doubts, while the captives below navigated the treacherous landscape of confinement, chains, and fading hope. The contrast between the two worlds was striking, a stark reminder that appearances are fragile and that reality often lies hidden beneath layers of performance and illusion. The eventual discovery of the basement would shake the town to its core, but for now the dual reality persisted, a delicate balance between the known and the unknown, between joy and horror, between freedom and captivity. The tension in the town had grown to a near unbearable pitch as the days passed. Conversations at the market became hushed, eyes darting toward the tents, as if the shadow of the performers had extended beyond the canvas, reaching into every street and alley. Some townsfolk claimed to feel a presence, a subtle pressure at the edge of their awareness, as though the air itself carried a secret too heavy to ignore. Children spoke in whispers of strange noises at night, clanging chains that seemed to echo through empty streets. Yet parents dismissed these claims as the imagination of youthful minds, unable or unwilling to accept the horror lurking beneath the spectacle. The performers above ground maintained an impeccable facade, a flawless execution of every act and illusion, but behind every bow, every flourish, there was a tension barely restrained, a silent communication that seemed to pulse beneath the surface, hinting at the shadow that lingered just beyond view. The town was mesmerized, caught between fascination and unease, unaware that the real drama was not on the stage but beneath it, in the basement where 17 lives were confined and carefully hidden from the world. The basement itself had become a microcosm of endurance and resistance. The 17 captives adapted to their conditions with ingenuity that bordered on desperation. They learned to communicate without alerting their captors, using subtle signals, tapping codes against the walls, and whispering in a cadence that could only be understood by those who had endured the same confinement. The chains, heavy and unforgiving, became a measure not only of captivity but of resilience, each link a reminder of their oppression, and each subtle movement a small act of defiance. The captives shared stories of past performances, of applause and admiration, of fleeting moments of freedom and wonder, clinging to these memories as lifelines in a world that sought to erase their identities. Every day was a test of patience and willpower, a careful balancing act between survival and the maintenance of hope. They learned the patterns of their captors, memorized their footsteps, and mapped the hidden weaknesses in the structure that might one day offer an opportunity for escape. The basement, dark and suffocating, became a crucible forging bonds between those who endured it, strengthening their resolve and reminding them that even in the deepest shadows, humanity could persist. Above ground, the show's allure had reached a fever pitch. The townspeople were entranced by the performances, applauding each feat, marveling at illusions that seemed impossible, and eagerly anticipating each new act. Yet beneath the applause, a subtle undercurrent of unease persisted, an almost instinctive recognition that the brilliance of the show could not fully mask the darkness it concealed. The performers, while maintaining their dazzling exterior, exhibited occasional slips, a flash of fatigue, a fleeting glance of anxiety, that did not go unnoticed by the most observant. These small cracks in the facade hinted at the truth below, creating a tension that seemed to thrum in the air like a barely perceptible heartbeat. The duality between the dazzling performance and the hidden suffering became more pronounced each day, a stark reminder that reality is often layered and that appearances can be deceiving in the most profound ways. The captives, aware of the growing scrutiny above ground, devised more elaborate means of signaling and maintaining morale. Small victories became monumental, whether it was finding a slightly looser chain link, managing to exchange whispered messages across distances, or recalling a memory that rekindled hope. They adapted to the rhythms of the days and nights, observing subtle changes in the routines of those above, using every opportunity to strategize, plan, and imagine a future beyond the iron bars that confined them. Their resilience was remarkable, each individual contributing to a collective strength that had been forged through suffering and necessity. Even in the absence of sunlight and the warmth of open air, they retained a spark of defiance, a determination that refused to be extinguished despite months of isolation and abuse. The townspeople, meanwhile, continued to debate among themselves. Some dismissed the whispers and rumors as superstition or exaggeration, a product of imagination inflamed by curiosity, while others became more vigilant, observing shadows, listening for anomalies, and questioning what they had been shown. The tension between belief and disbelief created a charged atmosphere, a sense that the town teetered on the edge of revelation without fully realizing it. Every passing day heightened the suspense, as if the universe itself were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable moment when the hidden truth could no longer remain concealed. The discovery came as a shock, sudden and overwhelming. It began with a creaking floorboard, a sound that at first seemed trivial, almost accidental, yet carried an intensity that demanded attention. One of the more curious townsfolk, unable to resist the compulsion to investigate, traced the source to a hidden panel in the floor, cleverly concealed beneath a heavy rug in the largest tent. The panel was small, unassuming, and yet behind it lay a world that no one had imagined. A basement where 17 individuals had been confined, chained, and hidden from the public eye for months, perhaps years. The stench hit immediately, a combination of damp wood, rust, and something unnameable, signaling the presence of human suffering long obscured. Panic spread rapidly as the gravity of the situation became apparent, the townsfolk recoiling from the sight of the chains, the bruises, and the hollow, haunted eyes that met them from the darkness. The performers above ground, those who had dazzled with feats of skill and illusion, were revealed to be victims themselves, and the layers of deception unraveled in an instant, exposing a cruelty so profound that it defied comprehension. The 17 captives were freed, yet the experience had left an indelible mark on their bodies and spirits. They moved hesitantly at first, adjusting to the light and the air, their eyes wide with disbelief and cautious hope. Every step was tentative, as if the ground beneath their feet could collapse into the darkness they had endured for so long. Some collapsed in relief, others clung to one another, whispering reassurances and silently mourning the time that had been stolen from them. The town, in turn, struggled to reconcile the horror with the entertainment that had once entranced them. Shock, guilt, fascination, and horror collided in a chaotic storm of emotion, leaving many unable to process the events fully. The realization that such cruelty had occurred in their midst, hidden behind layers of performance and spectacle, forced a collective reckoning with human capacity for both deception and endurance. Medical attention was quickly arranged, and the captives received care for their physical injuries, yet the emotional and psychological scars were far deeper and more complex. Counseling and support were offered, though the trauma of prolonged captivity could not be erased through simple care. The bonds forged in the basement became a source of strength, as shared suffering had created unbreakable connections among them, connections that now became vital in navigating the world above. Their experiences, though horrifying, had fostered resilience and ingenuity, a capacity to endure that would serve them in the years to come. The town itself underwent a transformation, the revelation of the basement's horrors casting a long shadow over its streets and homes. Curiosity turned to vigilance, fascination to reflection, and entertainment to scrutiny, as the realization spread that appearances could be dangerously deceiving. The traveling show, once a source of marvel, was dismantled, its tents removed, its performers freed, and its secrets laid bare for all to see. The duality of spectacle and suffering became a lesson, a stark reminder that the pursuit of amusement must never come at the expense of humanity and dignity. Even as the captives began the slow process of recovery, the story of the basement endured, whispered among townsfolk, shared with new generations, and remembered as a cautionary tale of deception, resilience, and the indomitable human spirit. The aftermath was not merely one of justice or revelation, but of transformation. Families, once entertained without question, now carried a sense of responsibility, a recognition of the fragility of perception and the importance of vigilance. The performers, though scarred and altered by their ordeal, gradually reclaimed their identities, their skills, and their agency, turning experiences of suffering into stories of endurance and courage. The town, marked by its complicity and curiosity, learned to balance fascination with skepticism, to question appearances, and to recognize that hidden within every spectacle might lie truths too dark to ignore. The weeks following the discovery were a whirlwind of adjustment, healing, and tension. The town had been forever altered, its streets and homes bearing the invisible weight of what had been hidden beneath the tents. The 17 former captives began to reintegrate slowly, their bodies still marked by chains, their spirits burdened by months of fear and deprivation, yet each step into the sunlight was a reclamation of what had been stolen. Their movements were cautious at first, tentative explorations of freedom that had once been unimaginable. The townsfolk, though initially awed and sympathetic, struggled to balance their fascination with the overwhelming responsibility of empathy. Every glance, every whispered conversation, seemed to carry the gravity of the basement, as if the shadows that had once imprisoned the performers now lingered among them, refusing to dissipate. Children, once entranced by the glitter and spectacle of the show, now approached with a mixture of curiosity and hesitancy, learning to respect the humanity of those who had been reduced to spectacle. The community itself became a delicate ecosystem of observation, support, and reflection, each interaction layered with a newfound awareness of vulnerability, cruelty, and resilience. The captives formed a tight-knit network, bound not only by shared suffering but by a collective will to reclaim identity and autonomy. Each day brought small victories, whether it was the sensation of unbound limbs, the warmth of sunlight, or the simple act of eating freely without fear. Yet beneath these moments of relief, the psychological scars remained vivid. Memories of chains, of whispers in the dark, of the constant watchfulness, haunted the performers, surfacing unexpectedly in dreams, in reactions to sudden noises, in moments of quiet reflection. Counselors and physicians worked tirelessly, offering care that ranged from practical rehabilitation to emotional guidance. But some aspects of the trauma were stubbornly resistant to external intervention. Within the performers' group, mutual support became a lifeline. They shared memories, strategies for coping, and small acts of reassurance, creating a buffer against the lingering effects of captivity and a foundation upon which to rebuild. Above ground, the town's relationship with spectacle and entertainment underwent a profound shift. The experience of being unknowingly complicit in the concealment of suffering had instilled a cautious skepticism in the populace. Performances were approached with scrutiny, exhibitions were questioned, and the eager curiosity of the town now carried an undertone of vigilance. No longer was entertainment an escape. It became a lens through which morality, ethics, and perception were measured. Merchants, neighbors, and local authorities alike became more attentive, their actions and observations now guided by the memory of the basement, its chains, and the 17 lives that had endured unimaginable hardship. The duality between awe and awareness, fascination and skepticism, had become permanent, leaving a legacy that would shape the community for years to come. Within the captives group, discussions turned toward the future. Some desired to leave the town entirely, seeking new horizons where anonymity and freedom could replace the specter of their past. Others wished to remain, believing that the community, now aware and transformed, could be a place of genuine acceptance, understanding, and rebuilding. The decisions were fraught with emotion, complicated by bonds formed in the basement, by loyalty to one another, and by the need to reclaim autonomy after prolonged subjugation. Every choice was a negotiation between hope and fear, between the past and the potential of what lay ahead, and each individual navigated this terrain with cautious deliberation, acutely aware that the shadow of their ordeal would influence every step. Meanwhile, whispers persisted throughout the town, tales of the basement and the hidden performances evolving into a legend of caution and resilience. The story of the 17 became a focal point for reflection on the boundaries of curiosity, the responsibilities of spectatorship, and the consequences of blind fascination. Schools, homes, and public spaces carried fragments of the story, passed down in hushed tones as both a warning and a testament to endurance. The memory of chains, shadows, and whispered voices became interwoven with daily life, a constant reminder that appearances can conceal truth, and that human dignity must always be safeguarded against the allure of spectacle. The town's adjustment to life after the discovery was not instantaneous, nor was it uniform. Different households, different individuals, processed the events in their own ways, some with profound empathy and others with lingering skepticism, struggling to reconcile the horror with the desire to move forward. Streets, once vibrant with the thrill of the show, now carried a quiet reverence, the laughter replaced by a contemplative silence, an acknowledgement of the fragile line between wonder and suffering. The performers, still healing, began tentative reintegration, attending public gatherings cautiously, reacquainting themselves with sunlight, open air, and human interaction that was not tinged by fear. Their bodies bore the marks of captivity, yet their spirits, though scarred, displayed remarkable resilience. Each small achievement, a walk in the town square, a conversation with a neighbor, a return to a basic routine, was a monumental triumph, a tangible reclamation of life once denied. The townspeople, influenced by the profound moral awakening sparked by the basement's revelation, began to reconsider their perceptions of entertainment, curiosity, and responsibility. Community meetings were convened to discuss safeguards against exploitation, to establish support for those affected, and to ensure vigilance against any recurrence of hidden suffering. Stories of empathy, courage, and moral responsibility circulated alongside tales of horror, creating a complex cultural tapestry that wove together the lessons of history and the urgency of ethical awareness. The experience fostered a collective consciousness that valued vigilance, compassion, and the careful observation of what lies beneath appearances, instilling a legacy that would shape the community for generations. Among the former captives, new roles began to emerge. Some dedicated themselves to advocacy, speaking about the dangers of unchecked spectacle, the importance of ethical oversight, and the resilience of those who endure hidden suffering. Others focused on reclaiming their artistic abilities, using performance not as a tool of exploitation, but as a medium for expression, healing, and empowerment. Shared experiences in captivity had forged unbreakable bonds, yet the survivors also recognized the necessity of individual paths, of rebuilding personal identities while honoring collective memories. The basement, once a site of oppression, became a touchstone for understanding the fragility of freedom and the strength required to reclaim it, a symbol of both suffering and indomitable spirit. The town itself began to evolve, guided by the memory of what had been hidden. Authorities implemented measures to inspect and regulate traveling shows. Residents cultivated heightened awareness of unusual behavior and subtle signs of distress, and conversations about ethics, justice, and human dignity became integral to daily life. Curiosity, once unchecked and potentially dangerous, was now tempered with caution, moral reflection, and active vigilance. The balance between fascination and responsibility had shifted, leaving the community forever altered, attuned to the unseen, and mindful of the cost of entertainment when human lives are placed at risk. In the quiet moments, the performers reflected on their journey from confinement to freedom, from despair to cautious hope. Memories of the basement's chains and shadows lingered, but so too did the strategies, resilience, and bonds forged within it. Their recovery was ongoing, their lives now a careful navigation between past trauma and the potential for renewal, between the lingering echoes of suffering and the reclamation of autonomy. Each day was a negotiation of freedom, a reclamation of identity, and a step toward rebuilding a life that had been stolen yet now remained firmly within their control. The town, forever mocked by its complicity and awakening, observed and learned, carrying forward a story that was simultaneously cautionary, tragic, and inspiring, a tale that would remain in collective memory as both a warning and a testament to human endurance. The survivors' presence in the town was a living reminder of resilience. Every glance, every interaction, every small act of independence was a demonstration of defiance against the darkness that had once confined them. They became teachers, guides, and exemplars, showing others the importance of vigilance, the necessity of compassion, and the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to endure and transform suffering into strength. As the town moved forward, balancing awe, caution, and reflection, the memory of what had occurred beneath the tents remained alive, an indelible mark on the community, a shadow that had been transformed into wisdom, vigilance, and the enduring affirmation of dignity and humanity. The aftermath of the basement's discovery reverberated far beyond the immediate town, drawing attention from neighboring communities, officials, and curious observers. Reports were written, letters were sent, and the story of 17 lives hidden beneath a traveling show became a cautionary tale whispered across counties. The performers, now free, were regarded with a mixture of awe, sympathy, and curiosity, their ordeal capturing the imagination and hearts of those who heard their story. Yet for the survivors, the attention brought both relief and discomfort. The world above, once a distant and sometimes threatening abstraction, now pressed in with questions, scrutiny, and a desire to understand, while the echoes of chains, whispers, and darkness remained vivid in memory. They had survived horrors that defied imagination, and yet the public's fascination threatened to reduce their story to mere spectacle once more, a painful reminder of the thin line between empathy and voyeurism. The town wrestled with its conscience, grappling with guilt, responsibility, and the stark realization that curiosity unchecked had allowed cruelty to persist. Community meetings became arenas of reflection, debates, and proposed reforms, addressing the ethics of entertainment, the duty to intervene in injustice, and the responsibility of vigilance in the face of hidden suffering. The townspeople who had once flocked to the shows now took active roles in oversight and advocacy, a transformation born from both shame and determination. Conversations that had been private and whispered now spilled into public spaces, infusing the community with a sense of moral accountability and collective awareness. The basement, once a place of terror, had become a symbol of awakening, its darkness illuminating the obligations of empathy and the necessity of attentive observation. The performers, though scarred, began to reclaim their artistry in ways that emphasized expression, healing, and the assertion of autonomy. Music, dance, and storytelling became tools not of exploitation, but of liberation, ways to reclaim the stage without relinquishing control. Their experiences, harrowing as they were, became part of their narrative, a testament to resilience that informed every gesture, note, and movement. Each performance was imbued with the gravity of survival, an unspoken dialogue between the past and the present, reminding audiences that wonder can coexist with responsibility, and that skill and spectacle need not come at the cost of human dignity. Bonds formed in captivity persisted, creating a network of mutual support that strengthened both individuals and the collective, ensuring that the memory of suffering was honored while resilience was celebrated. As attention grew, authorities took further action. Investigations expanded, regulations were drafted, and measures were enacted to prevent similar abuses from occurring elsewhere. The traveling show, once an emblem of deception and hidden cruelty, was dismantled, its structure repurposed or destroyed, leaving behind only memories and lessons. Scholars, journalists, and moralists debated the implications of the discovery, pondering human susceptibility to spectacle, the limits of curiosity, and the importance of ethical oversight. The story transcended its immediate context, becoming a cultural touchstone for reflection on morality, justice, and the duality of appearance versus reality. The town itself was forever altered, marked by a shared awareness that vigilance, compassion, and moral courage are essential to preventing hidden suffering and protecting the vulnerable. The captive's journey toward emotional recovery continued, each day layered with challenges and triumphs. Dreams, haunted by chains and shadows, occasionally surfaced, yet they became opportunities to confront trauma, to process memories, and to reaffirm agency. The survivors learned to navigate their past without allowing it to dominate their present, discovering strength in shared experience and in the simple assertion of autonomy. Their story inspired others, serving as both a warning and a beacon, a vivid demonstration that endurance and courage can emerge even from the most oppressive circumstances. Years passed, and the town, once captivated by spectacle, transformed into a community deeply attuned to ethics, empathy, and vigilance. The memory of the basement, of chains, shadows, and whispered suffering, became a permanent thread woven into its identity. Schools taught the story as a lesson in moral responsibility. Families recounted it to instill awareness, and public spaces displayed markers commemorating the resilience of those who endured. The performers, having reclaimed their identities and autonomy, continued to share their experiences, blending artistry with testimony, ensuring that the horrors endured would not be forgotten. Their performances became celebrations of survival, courage, and the indomitable human spirit, resonating with audiences in ways that were profound, transformative, and deeply human. The town's relationship with curiosity and spectacle had evolved. While fascination and wonder remained, they were tempered by critical awareness and ethical consideration. Citizens observed with attentiveness, questioned with thoughtfulness, and acted with responsibility, creating a community defined by vigilance, empathy, and moral engagement. The shadow of the basement persisted, yet it had been transformed into a source of strength, teaching that awareness and compassion can arise from the darkest experiences, and that humanity's capacity for resilience and morality is boundless when nurtured and exercised. For the survivors, life was a continuous negotiation between past trauma and present possibility. Bonds forged in darkness remained strong, a foundation upon which to rebuild trust, intimacy, and purpose. Each day offered opportunities to reclaim autonomy, practice artistry, and engage with the world on their own terms. Memories of chains and confinement, though never erased, became testimonies of endurance, shaping identity and perspective without dictating destiny. The act of living fully, freely, and authentically became both a rebellion against past oppression and a declaration of the human spirit's strength. The town, forever marked by its complicity and awakening, carried forward the story of the 17. Festivals, art, literature, and local memory preserved their experiences, ensuring that lessons learned from cruelty, resilience, and moral awakening would endure across generations. Ethical vigilance became embedded in daily life, shaping interactions, governance, and communal norms. The duality of spectacle and hidden suffering became a guiding principle, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, curiosity must be tempered with conscience, and that moral courage is required to safeguard those most vulnerable. Ultimately, the story of the basement of 17 lives chained in darkness transcended its historical moment. It became a symbol of resilience, a testament to endurance, and a lesson in vigilance. Freedom, once denied, had been reclaimed, and with it came the affirmation that the human spirit, when nurtured by hope, courage, and community,